All right, next one is with Pam, the goals.
Yes, and I'm going to ask Kristen Smetana to step forward to talk through. We have a PowerPoint that I will bring up for you, since she has been analyzing the data with teams. We will go through, and this does coordinate with the goal document. So we put the goal document back in to this the PowerPoint slides, so you can follow along with us. So.
Mary Ann can click it for you, Pam.
As we go through some of the data, it might be a little out of order than what's on your chart. We grouped it based on some of the things that we wanted to look at. So the first slide shows the graduation rate, daily attendance, and engagement. So you can see that the graduation rate dropped off in 2011 and 2012, and we didn't meet our target range, but you can also see that there are a lot of asterisks that kind of explain why that happened. And so the first thing is that the state determined that special education students that were receiving a certificate of attendance would count against us in terms of our graduation rate because they were not graduating. So they were coming back to receive services, and so they were not classifying them as graduating. And that was something that every school in Illinois had to deal with and had their graduation rates decrease. The other thing to point out is that on the bottom it shows what the graduation rates would have been if we were to include those students. And so in 2011, there was another thing that was happening, so I'll revisit that, but in 2012, I believe it was
95.8.
Yeah, 95.8 says 2011. But the other reason we can't really compare 2012 versus 2011 is 2011 represents the 5-year adjusted cohort graduation rate. And so what that does is it considers students that took 5 years to graduate instead of 4 years. And so originally that number was 94.7. The reason it dropped to 93.7 is because when the state was originally reporting those numbers to us in 2011, it didn't give us the opportunity to look at all of our students individually by name. And so when they adjusted the 5-year cohort, there were 3 students that were originally, one was not exited properly, one was not classified correct, and we weren't sure what happened with the other one. So this year we were able to see every individual student, and we were able to make sure that they were exited correctly and classified in the right way, but the state didn't provide us with that information in the past. Daily attendance, we met our target rate of 94%. And then engagement, in 2010 the board decided they wanted to look at engagement, and they classified that as the percent of students involved in at least one activity or at least one sport. So in 2011 that was 71%, and sports was 49%, and then activities was 47.7% is how that broke down. So the target range that was set was 72%. But the actual rate was 64%. And looking at that breakdown again, the sports, there was 49% of the students that were involved, and it was the activities percentage that decreased to 33.2%. And that was due to the loss of 19 activities last year, and then the additional 2 activities that were privately funded.
Can I ask a question before you go to the next one? So what do you do with the students who take the 5 years to graduate? Where do they get counted, or do they get counted?
They get added back after the fact.
Yeah, so
can you go back one, Mary Ann? Right click. There you go. Just right click. Previous.
So originally in 2011 the graduation rate was 94.7. So in theory, now that we have more data from the state and we have specific students, we can make sure that our graduation rate is accurate. Those numbers should go up because we're getting credit for those students that completed it in 5 years, as opposed to just looking at, did students graduate within 4 years? And the reason that our percentage went down in 2011 was because of those 3 students. So it was really just 3 students that we were looking at.
What happened originally when you did your graduation rate on the end of the year report, you put your own numbers in. A few years ago, they started assigning every student a student ID number in the system, so they could pull the data themselves and you wouldn't submit it. So the first year they made the change in how they were doing the graduation rate, and they were saying, we're not going to count your special education students who are continuing on or get a certificate of attendance. They did not allow us to put our numbers in. They pulled them automatically. They did not give us a report to edit and to verify and to check the numbers. So this year, when they gave us the adjusted cohort where we could add in the 5th-year graduates, they finally gave us a list and we saw a number of errors.
Right,
so,
but my question
yeah.
is, the 3 students, do they go to 2011? So if they graduate a year later, then last year's number will increase, not this year's.
That's correct.
So their number is always affiliated with the year they were intended to graduate?
Correct.
Yes,
Yes.
their
Thank you.
cohort.
That was
They
my
come in
question.
as
That's
freshmen.
right. That's exactly right. They enter as freshmen as a group, and they get counted back in,
But
even though it's a
your
year late.
special needs students that are allowed to stay through their 21st birthday and are given a certificate of completion unless they meet actual graduation requirements no longer count for the graduating class.
And they don't graduate.
Correct.
So the states say they don't graduate,
Right.
you can't count it.
Right, and in the
But
past,
the
it used
problem
to-
is you're comparing it to where you.
to where we used to count. So that's why when you see this number, we don't want you to be like, whoa, it's a huge drop off. It's because of state calculations.
And so every year you're gonna go back and correct the graduation rate from the year before,
Every year, that's
going forward?
correct. So the one you see up there right now, the 92.3%, we will adjust next year. So they're trying to do a good thing here. They're trying to encourage schools to not give up on these students, to keep them in programs and not, have them back for the 5th year and get their diploma so that they can move on with their lives. So it has a really good meaning and a purpose, but we just had to make the switch and live through it.
How many special ed people or students graduate, roughly?
I don't know that number off, and it changes from year to year as far as how many are, in the class. So I would have to get those numbers for you.
Well, because why isn't that number just pulled out completely if you're special ed and just have the graduation rate for our non-special ed
Because
students?
just
State
general
laws.
general thinking is that those special ed students you're supposed to provide the least restrictive environment, so you try to get them to be in the same requirements in the same classes and meeting the same things as their general population.
So
So
Kevin,
they-
are you saying their assumption is for those special ed kids that John asked about, that they would graduate in 4 years? And that's how they're calculated?
There were some students in the past that if they took the courses and they got a certificate of meets requirements, they were counted.
Right.
And now that's no longer.
But we know that when special education students come, they have a right through the state of Illinois to stay through their 21st birthday. But when they enter the school as a freshman, how does the state classify them? Does the state say, regardless of your IEP or expectations, that you will be counted in the cohort 4 years later?
I believe that's the way it is.
Yes, you'll be counted
You're given that
either
number
as
when you enroll.
graduating or not graduating.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. That's
So
correct.
the 93.7, is that adjusted for the 5th-year graduates?
Yes,
Okay.
it's been altered.
So when we set the target for this year, which was 95%, one question is, should we set two targets now? Should we set one for the result after the 4 years and a second for result after the 5 years?
Might make
I would wonder if we would just want to keep 95 because our goal would be, we'd still need to take into account the enrollment of the special ed, which Pam would have to go back and recalculate to see if there's a significant, but other than that, I would think that we would want to keep shooting for 95.
Well, that's fine with
Because
me,
at
but
the
then
credit recovery side, even.
Yeah, I think we should have discussion at the time we're setting these goals, because I think
Yeah,
I'd
we got some time on that.
like to carve out that number.
Well, plus we could also do another thing to build out what Tim said. Instead of maybe keeping the target range at 95, maybe you have 2 columns that say this is what it was, 95 minus a certificate, you know what I mean? Be able to do that. And then this way you have at least a follow-up saying this is what, we're comparing apples to apples on.
Yeah, we'll discuss it.
Yeah.
Goal setting,
Right.
I think is a good time.
So, and I don't want to, if you've got this in order, I don't want to take it away from you, but the fact of the matter is then we fell short of our goal.
Yeah.
Kevin's saying we should have kept it 95. So are you, as part of your presentation, going to talk about why we fell short and what we're going to do about it? Because, I mean, we set goals for a
Right.
reason. And if we
Right.
fell short because we weren't providing academic support and more kids failed, as
We-
seniors are
yeah.
going to graduate, we need to address that.
I do have the granular
Okay.
details on all of the kids. What's interesting when you do your graduation rate, kids that dropped out of school a year earlier, they'll count against you. Students who were expelled will count against you. Students who, so you have to look back, was that a bad year of discipline? And I have all those names on a sheet of paper, so we can look at it and see, do we expect that this year? When we look back over the past, we had a number of a higher rate of students that left us and just didn't continue their education, and so, but we know who they are. I know how many of them are special ed, how many aren't. When we do the reports, that's what we were looking at, that specific detail.
I think what Gary's saying also, as we set these goals in November and December on graduation rate, we can have some more specific data so we can set a target the board and the administration can meet.
So can I ask?
I'm sorry.
Can I ask one question, though, is on the graduation rate, if we didn't have this addition in that lowered the number, our graduation rate would be, if I look at 2010, would be comparable what 2010 would be, we'd be at 95.8 or above the target range, right?
Correct.
But that's not what you explained. Kids with special ed certificates don't graduate in 4 years. And we said, we were talking about the standard the state set, which is graduation. So to me, adjusting the number for kids who really didn't graduate, even though we used to do it that way, you knew you couldn't count special ed certificates when we set the goal.
Well, we counted it was a successful completion of the program. Many states did this. This was actually a federal initiative to try and get the states reporting graduation rate so that we could compare state to state and that they could see a little bit more clearly. And some states counted completing that program that was deemed appropriate by your IEP as a successful completion of your high school experience. But they have, defined graduation differently, and so the state of Illinois needed to, basically adjust the way they were allowing us to calculate. So we weren't the only school doing that.
I understand
Other
that.
schools were doing that as well. So yeah, it was a philosophical change. It was a way to get some uniformity across the nation. So when you're looking at the graduation situation and how many students really aren't making it, you had some consistency when you were looking at it nationally. And so that's really what's happening
I understand
here.
that. My point is, we're looking at ways to make it seem like the number's better than it actually is in my mind. When we set the goal, it was 95. We knew we couldn't count kids with special ed certificates because they don't graduate.
Right.
We came in at 92.3. So if we really think 95% is the goal, then we have some work to do to get it up to 95. Right. Or we, for what happened this year, we got to look at what happened this year, not just what are we going to do for next year, because it's too late then.
Right, and that's why I think we said we're going to carve out some more of the data, specific data when we get into the goal-setting analysis. The other thing is that the state first reported the graduation rate in the school report card last year in October, already after we started to set some of these goals and targets and some of this. So everybody is now in trying to adapt to the new model method to come up with interventions and things like that.
Okay.
I would like to just follow on that, because we keep talking about adjusting the target, but I think what's missing in the conversation is when we set a target, the number was not where we want it to be. And what I'd like to hear from administration is we don't think any intervention or anything is necessary at this time. We're going to follow it another year, maybe because we're going to look at the trend or we're going to measure it, but we don't think that there's a program issue or that our students will be less prepared. It's kind of like when you read the data and you interpret it, do you see that something needed to be changed in programming? Or as administrator, are you comfortable saying, no, I think we're doing what we need to be doing, and we will push forward, and we'll measure again next year.
I would like to respond to that, and it kind of fits with a little bit of discussion we've had with alternative school and different options for kids who are struggling. We've been working really closely with the truancy program at West 40. A lot of these kids that don't make it have attendance issues, truancy issues, or they have some behavior issues. So we did hire a part-time behavioral interventionist, and we were hoping that that person could be the person to work with some of these at-risk kids in-house. I even know that, and Dr. Skinkis could talk to this a little bit about LADSI discussing how some of those services could be provided. But this is a LADSI employee. We had one hired. We were ready to start with that person, and that was the person who got another job, got a full-time job, if you recall. So we're at a lag. We were supposed to have that person right out of the box at the beginning of the year. So we've been worried about those kids. We know who they are. We know the profile of what they struggle with, and we are trying to look for interventions, and hiring this new person who will be starting soon is one response to that. So maybe that's getting at what you're asking.
Yeah, it's important for me as a board member that you look at the data and you say, now I'm going to move on to it. You know, I've learned something from my data, and I'm going to act on that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a great,
yeah, absolutely.
Move forward how we're going to do that.
I think the telling factor in this will just to be the amount of special ed population. Because technically, if the goal is 95 and we have maybe 8 or 9 students that needed a half a semester, and we get all those students to pass and graduate, that could go up to 93.8 or 94.2, and we might not be that far off.
And one of the things that Kevin mentioned earlier was if we put in some of these summer school interventions for kids who are starting earlier, they might not drop out in the junior year, they might not drop out in the senior year, they might make it. So we're trying to, starting the bridge program in the summer for the kids in transition was another response, a way to look at, we can identify our at-risk learners before they even step foot in the door, and what are we doing? So we are trying to aggressively work at those interventions.
Out of these, 95, 93, do you have historical stats on the, I imagine there's 320 in a graduating class, so you're talking about a percent is 3 kids. Do you have stats on, out of the, 7%, we're talking about 25 kids, 27 kids, what were the reasons why and you had historical trends over the period?
We can look at everything on them. How many detentions they had, how many absences they had, what their test scores were coming in. And that's one thing that Kristen's been really helping with, is that, it helps to have a former math person.
And based on that, you would come to the board and say, in order to get our goals to 95, we identified historically this pattern, and we need to do this intervention.
Exactly.
Okay.
Many of them have truancy issues, attendance issues, behavior issues, but low scores coming in to us, and so they're at risk academically, and the school.
So you can identify your freshman class, well, not the freshmen, but sophomore class already, the junior class already, potential risk students that you're seeing out there.
That's right. Exactly.
Okay.
And I want Kristen to be able to go through her presentation, so we're not setting these goals and breaking them down, but it's okay for us to aim high and miss. I don't want us to start setting targets just because we want to set targets that we can hit every year. That's why I think we should try, if 95%'s been a consistent trend before they changed the cohort model, we should try to keep trying to hit 95% and figure out if we need to add interventions or do things to keep shooting high.
Because if 2% is not going to be counted as a pass, then your potential is 98%. 95% of that 98% is 93.1%.
Right.
Kevin, this would speak to your vision as a superintendent, your vision of what you think is possible in a school district of this size with these resources. And you would say, really, if we were running like a fine-oiled machine, we could hit this. And that's what would drive your number.
And that's why I want to use it more for November, December, to start breaking it down and talking and spending more time on the board.
We got the math whiz here, they're going to help us out even more.
Okay, can I say something about the data? I mean, this is really important, and Gary just alluded to it. A percentage, 1% of 400 people in a class, or 95% graduation rate for a class of 400, I think, is roughly 20 don't. So what we need to focus on is those 20, that 5%. We should look at it as a non-graduation rate, an absolute number of people, say there's 20 per year, and figure out, you know, why they aren't graduating. So you need to present them that number. It's the framing issue. Non-graduates and absolute numbers. Just having percentage up there, I mean, people have done studies on this. It's confusing as all heck because you can't really get your handle on it. But if we're only talking about, you know, 10 kids and the next year it's 12, well, then you can look at, well, why did those 2 people not graduate? Put them in the category, and then we can focus on the intervention we want.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, let's go to your next.
I have a question on the last one, Kristen, if you don't mind. I think you said the sports were very equal between the 2 years, right? Which means
49% both years.
so the initial indication is to pay for play, like we said, it didn't affect it, but so the clubs were down, but now and the play was out too. That apparently had a large participation.
I have a list of all the eliminated
So
clubs.
my question is for whoever wants to say, Kevin, I'll direct it at you, is do we think that by adding additional clubs in the play this year while still having the pay to participate for it, you know, since this is our goal,
No, participate.
are we going to get back up to 72%?
I think you have 2 variables. One that's very positive that could increase obviously in the engagement, which is adding back all of the things that the board you know, allowed us to add back, but yet then you have the variable of more burden on the families and they're making choices. So it could very much stay steady that we've added things back, but we have to check those. I have not done a check on our participation numbers with, except the Student Association told you they're up this year in membership. So we'll see if it has an impact. I mean, that's to be determined.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Next slide, Marianne.
So the next slide talks about PSAE pass rates for last year's junior class, so this year's seniors, so the graduating class of 2013. And as you can see, PSAE, our reading scores, we had 67 students meet and exceed, and math, we had 69.3%. And so I want to spend some time going over those specific students and where they came in, and explain a little bit as to you know, what we did to help them grow while they were here. So the next slide talks about the meets and exceeds. And so PSAE is comprised of ACT on day 1 and work keys on day 2. And you can see for reading, the class of 2012 came in with an 8th grade Explore score in reading of 16.63. The students that we were just looking at, that PSAE data, they came in more than a point below them at 15.33. And almost the same thing occurred in math. And so these students were coming to us and they were more vulnerable. Their average scores were not as high. And so in addition to that, the state also made it more difficult to receive a meets or exceeds. So if we look specifically at reading, while the cut score didn't change, the combinations did. And so last year for the graduating class of 2012, students could receive a 17 or 18 on the reading part of the ACT and receive a 5 on the work keys and consider meeting standards. This year, they said, you know, we need to place more emphasis on the work keys, and so a student who had that same ACT score had to have a higher work key score in order to be considered meets or exceeds. And so the state really by placing a bigger emphasis on the work keys, made it harder for some students to receive those meets. And so looking specifically at the students who didn't meet standards in reading and in math, we look specifically at every single student, and 16 students in both reading and in math were near passing within 1 or 2 points. And so looking back at the pass rates for math specifically, if you consider those 16 students who probably had the same ACT score as students did last year, but maybe their work keys dropped a point, if we added those students back in, we'd be at 75%. So those 16 students could have performed exactly how the students in the graduating class of 2012 did, but because of the way the state changed the emphasis that they're placing on the work keys, and they're changing the cutoff for that, it made it harder for these students to pass.
It seems to me, though, that, when they do these standardized tests, I'm not an expert, but, when they change, like an SAT now is supposed to be the same as it was 30 years ago, so how come the state doesn't do that?
It's built on the 1999 norm.
But these scores you're looking at with the PSAE are not ACT. It's also adjusted on the second day of testing, which is work keys, which if you remember right around when the majority of the board was elected in 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, that's when the whole discussion was going with the outgoing board and Pam in her first year of administration of trying to come up with incentives to make kids concentrate more on the second day, because when they're sitting for an ACT, they know that they can use that ACT score for college applications. But the second day, which is the work keys, which is like applied math and applied reading, every school sees it kind of a drop-off. A lot of kids don't show up for the second day of the test, or they don't take it as serious as when they're doing the ACT. And what the state wanted to do was put more emphasis on the the career readiness. So they put more of an emphasis on the cut score, combining the two, so that the second day had more bite. So the kids took the second day more serious.
So let me ask you a question. I remember we were on the board when we brought that up, and that was something of somewhat a contention between the board. Did that work? Remember we talked about?
For the class of 2012, we saw a big difference in their work keys. Two things. We did two things simultaneously. We allowed them to opt out of some of their exams if they, in that content area, if they would meet or exceed. But we also then did a really concentrated effort across the curriculum on reading for information, which the work keys is really stressing. It's more informational reading and how you can read charts like the things we're looking at, how you can read maps, how you can read memos, and getting information-based nonfiction reading. So we did a real push on that, and we saw growth. And what Kristen's going to talk about when she moves like one more slide on, there are certain expectations that we can make about students in certain bands of performance on standardized tests like the ACT-based test, which we can't make those predictions on the work keys because that's a state level test, and they never really tell us much about how they combine these to get the scores. We have to figure it out by going into the data and looking, how could this kid with a 20 not have met, he got a 20 on his ACT, but he didn't make standards. What did he get on his work keys? And we're putting together and trying to puzzle. They don't tell you how they combine them to get the cut score. It's their secret, and they can change it every year. So that's kind of what we're discovering. But to answer your question, we think the incentives and what we did with our students made a difference last year. The class of 2013 they're a little bit more vulnerable, so maybe some of the things that we did as learners didn't have the same impact. But we can demonstrate what we've done with them with interventions and how we've grown them as learners. So that's the next slide. Go ahead. You can talk about that.
Can you go back one slide, though?
Oh, okay.
Where you have 117 students in the class of 2013 did not meet standards in reading, and 110 students did not meet standards in mathematics. Was that when they entered as 8th graders?
No, that was on the PSAE, so that combines their performance on the ACT and the work keys.
So that represents about a third of our graduating class that is not meeting standards. So how do these students, a third of our graduating class is not meeting, how are they doing when they get into college? Are they getting into college classes, or are they having to take remedial
That's
classes?
the percent we have here, 67, 69.3.
I think the next slide will show that, because the work keys doesn't get them into college. So
Let's let her.
if the next slide might answer your question,
Okay.
let's see if it does, okay? No, back.
Go back one more,
Back.
so you can see the interventions.
So EPAS growth is ACT's educational planning and assessment system. And so that looks at the growth that students have from their 8th grade Explore to Plan. And the Plan test is the test that they take their sophomore year. And then the Plan to ACT is 3 points. So the total EPAS growth from when they enter in as a freshman and their Explore score as an 8th grader And then their score on the ACT is 5 points. And the ACT has done a lot of research to come up with that number. And then vulnerable students who come in, not meeting the standards on the Explore, they don't grow as much. And so the EPAS growth for the class of 2013, so those students that we were just talking about their PSAE data, they grew 6.17 points. So they grew more than what's expected growth by ACT. So even though this class came in and they were more vulnerable, and ACT is saying that it's difficult to grow a group of students that are more vulnerable, we were able to surpass the expected 5 points of growth. And the reason that we do that is because there are so many different interventions at RB to assist the students. And that's really important because all of these students' needs are very different. Some students might need targeted interventions in one area and not another. And so some of these are specific interventions targeted at students depending upon where they enter in as a freshman. And so those would be our extended period freshman reading, and our extended period algebra, and then we also continue that reading support for sophomores who need that. In addition, we have the ESL reading and writing in the tutorial classes, special education, study skills, and academic support. In addition to that, throughout the entire curriculum, we have executive functioning, which this year is now for freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. We also have the nonfiction reading that Pam talked about. The CAP, college readiness, and RB prep, I'm going to go into a little more detail when we look at ACT scores and college readiness for that graduating class. And then we also have NHS tutoring.
But we have all these interventions, and yet a third of our class is not meeting standards.
So when you look at the students that didn't meet standards, we look to see, well, are we at least growing them of what's expected? And of those students, there were only 29 students that we couldn't grow as much as is expected. And looking at those students, every single one of them received at least one intervention, and several of them received more than one. And of those students, 41% of them were transfer students. 24% of them speak another language at home, and then 24% of them have IEPs or 504 plans. So, yes, to answer your question, we had a third of students that didn't meet standards in reading, but we were still able to take those learners where they came to us and grow them as least what was expected or more than what was expected for those students.
Show the ACT score, because I think PSAE gets wrapped up a little bit, and people get, because there's the 2 days of testing, so I think that was your next slide. Or okay, you have some other interventions, okay. This is important for the board to see as we go forward setting goals.
So looking at some challenges and then trying to make some predictions. Right now, our average freshman reading class is a size of 22. And last year, the class sizes were on average 16.5. And we use a program called, a research-based intervention called Read 180. And they recommend that those class sizes are 15 to 21. And we currently have all of our freshman reading classes above 21. Some of them are up to 24. And then in addition to that, our average extended algebra class is 28.3. And last year the average class size was 13.7. So, when we're looking at those interventions, the most important thing is making sure that we keep those class sizes smaller so that we can provide the individual attention that those students need to our most vulnerable learners, especially when we look at, that reading and the recommended size is 15 to 21. We're really getting away from the fidelity of that research-based intervention that's proven to be effective.
I hate to cut you off, but when you start saying this, it sort of turns me off, okay? Because you're just saying, research recommended this. I mean, I'm sitting on the board, and the community at home also needs to know, what's the basis for this statement you're making? It's just, it's on the slide. That, to me, that's not good enough.
The research-based intervention.
Could I ask one question before?
Sure.
When you're saying this year and last year, do you mean the current year or the year that this data is based on versus the prior year before we reduce the staff?
So
I'm not sure
the
what you
average
mean.
freshman reading class would be this year. So this would be looking at this year's freshmen. And last year would be looking at this year's sophomores.
So we're comparing data and size to the class size that we don't have the numbers for how they're going to perform.
Right, so I'm not
Okay.
saying that this
It may or may
impacted
not.
the results for the
Okay.
PSAE for 2013. I'm just saying that this is a challenge that could affect, future.
But it would be helpful to know, since it went down, what was the size the year before? Because then we would have a
Definitely, we had tried to
comparison.
get, probably very similar, because the Read 180 program, we were trying to keep at 18, because that has to do with the rotations of what they're doing on the computer and off of the computer. And as far as research-based, there is a response to intervention mandate in the state of Illinois where you need to have research-based programs for reading and math, and then also behavior. So we need to have a plan. And so schools you look at different tools. And this one was Kevin Feldman's Read 180 program that a number of schools use and have had most success with. So some schools have tried different programs, and you look at what really is growing your readers with fluency, vocabulary, and all of that. So there was a great deal of work put into that. That's an expensive program. And recently, with our transfer students coming in at risk, we needed to get more licenses. But that's a program that the school and the district made a decision to move 2 years ago when looking at the different programs for our reading response to intervention, or RTI program.
But Tim, to answer your question, the class sizes were closer to the 16.5 when these kids were, the kids that scored lower, they had the smaller class sizes.
Right.
Okay.
What Kristen's trying to say is,
We potentially
Right
have a
now-
risk, we don't know.
well, right now we got 22, so if our kids scored lower and they were at 16,
But-
are we even going to be risk? There's no.
So
no proof of
potential
how
of
they're
that,
gonna score.
but with the
Potential.
16 we had, we still, that class grew, that 6 steps, or
Yeah,
whatever the
6
wording,
points.
6 points. But this freshman class appears to be coming in very strong. Is that, am I reading that wrong with the maths, 16.79, and the reading 15.73? That's better than the class that we were comparing poor performance to, right? Those are better.
Correct, but this would be the students that are juniors that are taking the test this year. So
Cool.
that class.
But-
And so,
I don't know what you're saying, correct, to, are they, we've compared, we have data for 3 years on these 3 scores.
Do we have
We
the
don't- we-
freshman class?
So, well, let me ask a different question. What you did present, you said the 2012 class, right, 2013 class scores were lower than the 2012
Yes.
just graduated. And this is the incoming, this is the junior class,
Junior
right?
class, right.
So what we're trying to find out is where do they fit in versus the 2 that you earlier compared for us? Are they higher than the current senior class?
Their Explorer scores are trending near the class of 2012 and perform better than the class of
Okay,
2013.
that was what you
They're-
asked.
I think what
Yeah,
you
they're better
should,
if you
They're in the
go
middle.
two slides
for
back.
They're in
reading
the
and
middle.
math, they're both in the middle.
They're
They're
in the
both
middle.
in the middle.
Thank you.
They're not as strong as the kids that just graduated. They're not quite, they didn't come in quite as weak as the kids that are our seniors this year.
Thank you.
So they're right in the middle.
and what we wanted Kristen and Pam to highlight is just some of the things that have changed. There's not a predictor that says that because obviously going to the lower class sizes didn't work well for this current junior class that just took the test. But what we're just trying to show the board is different things that we need to be aware of. So when we start looking at staffing and some of those things, we want to make sure that the board's aware that where the class sizes are in some of these extended courses.
I
But you-
don't understand why you said that, because, again, you're throwing all this data. That says the average freshman class size is 22 this year, and last year was 16 and a half, and we're talking about last year's junior class. There's not even data on what their class size was, is there?
No.
The reason we showed you the freshman level is that that's that huge intervention that we put with the kids that come in that are vulnerable. The reason we were able to grow the class beyond what the National ACT organization says, with hundreds of thousands of students across the United States, they expect us to grow them 5 and we grew them 6, is because we get those freshmen immediately. We look at their Explore scores and we put them in a reading class that we know is going to help them grow. we tried for years and years to keep those at 18 because that's where the best results have been in the data from the Read 180 program. So what we're showing you now is our freshman reading kids now that are coming in are in larger classes. We're just telling you that's one of the things that's happening. What will that mean down the road? Will we grow that group of freshmen, the 6.15 points that we were able to grow, you know, the other group we were talking about? Maybe, maybe not. But it is something that we're telling you is just a concern. Our vulnerable freshmen this year are not having as much attention. They can't because there are more of them in a class, especially with the algebra. That's
and you mentioned something that you saw, the stats you saw that the underperformers who didn't perform as well, English was a second language, was a prominent percentage of that?
24%.
24 of that.
Of the students that didn't make the expected growth and didn't make AYP.
So it's a pool.
And had RB had something special, teacher that could bilingual language specifically in the class on these extended algebra and extended reading?
That's our tutorial push-in, and those are interventions that we do have. And they take a separate access test as well, and Patricia reads.
With a bilingual teacher.
So even growing the 6 points, I'm having a hard time understand why even when we're growing above expected, why we're still ending up with a third of our class scoring below meeting expectation.
Because the EPAS is on Explore, Plan, and ACT. It doesn't count into factor that state test of the work keys. So what we're showing is that they've grew, correct, Kristen, that we grew them from when they took this Explore test, they took the practice, which is the plan as a sophomore, and then they took their ACT. We grew their ACT scores more than what we expected. But that number you keep referring back to includes that second day of testing, which is this work keys test. There's not a 3-year way to prepare them for that.
So let me ask you something. Let me put it into the plain man's way. The EPAS, if I'm growing the EPAS more than I'm expected to do, that's where I really want to grow because that sets up my child or that child for ACT, but also position them for college.
Right, correct. Which is the next slide that talks about college readiness and looking at that ACT benchmark of 21 and looking at that composite score.
Where the work keys are good, but they are not a real good factor to tell me Johnny's going or Julie's going to do good in college.
No, well, actually, the ACTs do not give us information whether or not when the students matriculate into college, if they can go straight into college math or if they have to take the remedial year. Actually, the keys are probably more indicative of if they'll have to take a remedial year of math or be able to go directly into college math.
No, we used Triton and the colleges use ACT score, not the work key score.
Do we have any data on how if our students can go directly into the college math and reading?
Yeah, you could. The ACT breaks down a summary report of that, of how many of our seniors graduated with what the baseline level is. And I think last year, I don't have it in front of me, but it was about 43% of our seniors met or exceeded everyone. But I don't want to get off task of where we're at.
I want to ask you a question about this slide, please.
Oh, okay, the other one?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, it's for the first time in a year and a half, we spent a lot of time talking about how our students are performing, and there's a lot of new things for us, right? You showed the range on class for freshman reading. Is there not data, and again, wherever the data comes from for algebra? Mm-hmm. I mean, is there similar data on research-based recommended size for algebra?
Well, the research-based recommended size comes from the specific program that is used in the extended reading. And so that program is Read 180, and so the class is structured around, you know, what's recommended for that program and making sure that it's implemented correctly.
I understood that. I'm sorry, you explained that. I'm asking if there's similar data for algebra.
And you're a former math department chair, so you can speak about the problem with math intervention curriculum is not at the level of the reading, and everybody's struggling with it, but I think we finally found a tool that we can use. We've used different ones.
But you don't have to,
yeah.
I'll tell you why I'm asking the question.
It doesn't, we don't have it.
I'm asking the question
Yeah.
because for our freshmen in reading, we went from at the low end of what the recommended size, and now we're above the top range. I don't know what the range is for algebra, but we went from 13.7 to 28.3. We more than doubled the size of our classes. I'm no statistical genius, and I read articles, but wouldn't surprise me in 2 years from now. I don't know if I'll still be on the board. If I am on the board, you're going to tell me that group didn't do well in math.
Yeah. When we set the sections for these extended period classes, they're obviously a period and a half. So the way it fits in a teacher's schedule, you know, we're not running 4 sections of it like we are with the reading. We're running 3, because to run the 4 makes your class size really low, but running 3 makes it's a bad break is what happens with the amount of kids. We end up having more kids coming in needing intensive reading interventions than needing math interventions. So if we could have had if we had a few more, we could have had a 4th section, and then it wouldn't have been so overly filled. Right. So it was last year we went with the 4th section, and you know, we didn't have as many transfer kids come in with the high math needs. It was a gamble. So this year we've had a huge number of transfer students come in with higher math needs than the previous year. So going down a section hurt us. So we made an assumption and it hurt us. Does that kind of explain it?
Well, it explains
the wide variance.
It explains it, except for me, the reason we set the goals and the reason we're asking to explain it is to say, are we where we should be, and should we change something to improve it? And I talked to Kevin. Their freshman year is one time, as he said many times. If we feel that those kids, there's way too many kids in the class for them to perform, we can't correct it next year. We have to correct this year.
Sure, so what we can do though, and I think we're getting again into the goal setting, so I want to just remind us of that. As we look at the 28.3, when they take the Explore test here in November, we look at their scores, and if we see, hey, listen, these kids aren't growing where they need to be growing, we should then make sure in our sophomore intervention classes, we make an effort to staff so they're lower and they get more time and more direct teacher intervention. So there are some things that works with this EPAS so that we can look at this freshman class, look at those classes of 28.3, look at their performance on the Explorer in the midpoint of their freshman year, and then say, we need to get some extra interventions, if not in the spring, definitely at the start of their sophomore year, make sure those sophomore extended classes are lower sizes so that there's more interventions to recoup what they lost.
Well, let me just ask so I understand. What if you looked at it right now and said, you know, really we should break it down into 4 classes? And I don't know, is that even possible to do once the year starts?
And it's tough because of scheduling conflicts with the other classes.
With the other teachers that are, right now we have no teacher that would be currently available. We'd have to hire somebody to do that .3 because our part-time math teacher right now teaches one of the extended period classes.
This is what I told the board at the beginning of the year when we did the budget, that next year as we staff, I'll probably ask for a few sections ahead of time so we have a little more flexibility as we build the master schedule. So if we see that like a math or an English intervention course needs to be a little lower, we can plug it in right away. You know, where they got into trouble is they added that extra section in the previous year. They didn't get the transfers they thought, so then they had a class of 13 kids. You know, so that's why we waited this year to see exactly where our transfer numbers came in. So now having a year working with them in 2 years of data, we can say, hey, let's make sure we have a .6 available for transfers without assigning them a specific class. But we've already started to account for that.
That's a good question.
At what point? I'm sorry, you were talking your question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll be brief. To Pam, are the inordinately, or the large number of transfer kids that need special care, is that an anomaly, or is this becoming a trend that we get an influx?
Since I've been here, this is my 3rd year, it's a trend that our transfer students come into us with high needs.
High needs. So we can expect to have to deal with these problems now and in the future.
I'd make that assumption.
Okay.
Okay, now we go to the next slide.
I think Gary
two questions. And when do they transfer in? After freshman year?
Well, like this year, and I don't have the transfer data all in front of me, but we had, the last time I looked, which was several weeks ago, we had 97 transfer students, and I think at that point, 45 or 50 of them were freshmen, and almost all of them needed one of our intervention classes. So, you know, usually the majority of the kids that transfer in are freshmen because you try and move at the beginning of that high school experience.
Oh, when you're classifying transfer, not coming from the feeder
Right,
groups that you would have identified
the
as
non-feeder
known
district, yeah.
feeder, which you have a better visibility to that
Yeah.
education process. Okay.
Right.
The second question is, so at what point do you get a composite field for your freshman class? When's the stats all get put
We
together?
test the freshmen, was it in January? Or when do our kids take the Explorer? Is it December, actually?
The 8th graders?
The
or
8th
freshmen?
graders. 8th graders.
The 8th graders take it in December.
In December.
And then we
So
retest that same test in November of this year.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you're going to grab the transfers. You have the picture of all your feeders.
The kids coming from the feeder, yeah,
Transfers
we have.
you don't know.
Which is how we get some of the students in the bridge program in the summer, which is, you know, why we're working an intervention we're working with is to articulate more with the middle school so that some of the reading interventions, they could start working on some of those.
Another I'm asking is in the budgeting process. So you would get a general gauge of what you think you're going to need in the extended, plus you're going to automatically add on 40 based on history, or whatever the historical
40, 50,
patterns
right.
are. Okay.
Yeah, we could do that for you early, very early.
Okay, Marion.
I'd like to ask a question before you move. Gary brought it up. Are we, on Dan's question, are we seeing a trend consistent or changing with students coming from our feeder middle schools?
Ooh, did you sit in the reading and the math RTI meetings and looked at what our kids are coming? I don't know if I could make any broad statement. I know we have teams analyzing that data that meet regularly, math data teams and reading data teams, and then the full district team. I missed that meeting. I had a conflict, but I really couldn't answer that.
So
off the top of my head.
we've spent a lot of time about transfers from outside the district, but if we see a decline from our middle school students coming from our feeder schools, that would mean our need is greater.
No, exactly.
Is there, will you be able to bring information?
Sure, I could probably.
Another time?
Yeah, but I also want to be cautious as we're working on how we're growing kids when they walk through our doors. So what I don't want to start doing is putting up scores on our feeder programs and then start. I want to be careful of, you know what I mean?
I don't want scores on the feeder schools particularly, but I think it would be helpful if the board knew that the problem is greater than just the 97 students who are coming from outside the district, and that we said we need more resources so that when we're looking at staffing or class size, we are taking in a broader population than just those students from outside the district.
Well, we can interpret that based on, what was the number before, 116 or 120. If only 40 were transfer, we could read into the fact that the feeder is supplying the majority of.
Right.
64%
Of at-risk
are
learners.
feeder district.
So that can be interpreted. And people watching this can interpret that also, that the feeder programs are. But you're also recognizing that out of a freshman class of how much, most of them are coming from the feeder, 320 or 330, whatever the number is, majority are coming from the feeder, and you're talking about 10% of it coming as transfers. And
Okay.
but of the transfers, 50% of them are.
And I don't know if you just saw the national SAT report that just came out that said that the lowest reading scores of the SAT in, was it 15 years or whatever? So reading, you know, is dropping across the nation at all levels of students. It could be the technology, could be a number of things, but we are seeing a crisis of reading, I think, in the nation, and I don't believe we're the only school dealing with it. So.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Matt. Obviously, this topic is important, and this is going to happen the first time you're going to present anything, as we did last year with staff coming up here. I know we're focusing on the kids that aren't graduating, people that aren't meeting the standards, but I want to make sure in these presentations, and even if we have to readjust our goals, how are the top kids doing? And Kevin, you alluded to this, like how are we doing, a kid comes in here, how are we growing them, you know, on average, and not just the, you know, the people that aren't hitting the standards, but how are the top kids doing? Top 10%,
Right.
the SAT scores.
Isn't these two right here
That's
kind of
why,
tell you?
that's why I've
Well,
been,
it's, yeah.
Good lead it, John.
but that's why I've been trying to say that
We're focusing, I want to focus on the
this is the
good.
bigger picture in that this college readiness and using the composite ACT, I mean, like Kristen showed you, if those kids came in at a flat 15 or 15.03 in their Explorer and we're growing them 6 points, they're closer to a 21. That means our goal should be trying to get as many kids to that 21 benchmark or beyond. So our composite and our percent of graduating class to it be achieving 21 or better, I mean, that to me gives us a little more clearer picture of what we're doing in a 4-year snapshot of what high school should be. You know, that's why you can sit here all day and analyze the PSAE and not meeting. High school's 4 years. Let's look at how they did when they started as a freshman and they ended as a senior, not in April of their junior year when they still have almost a year and 3 months of school left or 2 months of school left. And that's why I think this gives you a little more of a
Well, I think
picture.
that's important for because we discussed this before. Everyone's got choices about where they want to send their kid to school. St. Ignatius, Fenwick, plenty of private parochial schools here. You know, I think Arby's always been very good and competitive with all these schools. I think we need to prepare the data that we can show the people in this district that we actually are doing a good job and we're going to do what it takes, you know, to be better than those schools. And the way to do that is, like you said, is let's get this data out here and present it, because I want to see it.
We also have some AP data after this slide or the next slide that will also show you what we're doing for those top students as well.
Kevin, did I misunderstand you? You said, let's not look at this, let's not look at that, let's look at this. But if we set goals, we should look at all of them. And there's a reason we set the goals, because they actually measure different things with different groups at different times.
Right.
I mean, this is great. And I'm sure Kristen's going to tell us why this class is great. You know, and some of you have kids in this class, so you should be proud of them. But
We spent a lot on the PSAE, and the reason that PSAE is probably on that goal chart because right now that's what the state says schools will be evaluated.
Right.
But you also got to look at
But
it
I
too
think it
is,
should be a bigger snapshot. There's an argument on that.
but I think you also got to look at it too is,
Yeah.
they see a need. So that Explore test says, hey, we got a problem, you know, we got some kids that need some problems. Here's what we're going to be proactive and go with them. Now, given that we had the larger number of transfers, but we're still working with both higher and lower, but on lower ones, we're taking a real big look at it and see what's happening for them. Okay, go ahead.
Well, before you go to the next screen, I think this also speaks to, Kevin, you were alluding to our big picture vision on the course.
Right.
You know, as we go forward, we want to remember what we've seen, and you were talking about, so if we're looking at course, are we looking at math and reading?
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct.
And we want to be able to use this data to make informed decisions about how important is that core and where we're going with the core.
I think an interesting report that the board, I can include in a Friday update, is the ACT for the graduating class provides a brief one-page or front-back page summary that shows how many of these kids with the grad, you know, it shows a composite, it shows how many of them are ready in math, science, English, and reading for college level courses. And it also breaks down kind of like how they scored if they had 4 years of math versus 3 years of math, 4 years of science versus 3 years of science. That's a pretty telling figure. And I can get that report for the board.
Part of your vision that you were talking about.
And I think, yeah, I can show that future. I want to get Kristen through some of her stuff that, she's been here since 7 and.
The next slide just speaks a little bit to the college readiness, that program that we have, the CAP and the RB prep classes. So these are things that we have at RB that we help students perform so that we get as many students as we can to that 21 benchmark on the ACT. And so the CAP class is either a semester or the year-long class that has rotations of English reading, math, and science. The college readiness is we identify students that with one of the practice ACTs that have a 17 through 19 score, and we provide them targeted support throughout the school day I believe starting in February or so that we can help those students, gain 2 or possibly 4 points to meet that 21 benchmark. And then RB Prep, we have several different options to help students prepare for the ACT. And so we have the before school classes, the after school classes, or the weekend classes before the April ACT. And so those classes provide 20, well, it depends on which one you choose, but 28 or 14 actual meeting times, but 28 lessons to prepare students for that ACT. And so we use that data that we've had when they take that practice ACT to identify additional students who need that support in improving their ACT scores. And so looking at some of the data, the college readiness students for the class of 2013 improved 3.5 points just by having that additional class during the school day. And then a student in CAP, was in year-long CAP and college readiness, improved almost 7 full points from where she started on the ACT.
I just have to say, this is the thing I was amazed about when I came to RB. I don't know a school anywhere that offers these kinds of programs for kids. It is really an amazing commitment to take kids, and I just see this, I see doors of opportunity opening up for these students. Getting kids that are coming in to grow that much is unheard of at other schools on an ACT. You could take a Kaplan test or course on your own. We stop and we say to our students, these are foundational, important skills for you to be able to get to different colleges. That 21 is going to open up a lot of doors at universities for students. So I think that's great. Remember that anyone can take CAP. So a student that's already got a 21 can take a CAP class and grow their scores more and get into a highly selective school that they might not have been able to get into without having that opportunity. So I just want to pause and really give credit to the innovators who brought this program in, and to the school boards that have supported it for years and years, because I think it's done well.
This is one of the initiatives that with the boards, when us during staffing at the beginning of the year flagging that we implemented another section, and through further discussions that today even we're going to staff that so that it's got even, because this is the kind of data and getting kids ready for the ACT and growing them and getting them college ready. This is what a high school should be about. And we have data to show that we're growing kids. So this is something as we go back and look at staffing next year and interventions, this is something we want to make sure we support.
Could you please tell us what you're comparing? The result is the current senior class when they took their ACT as juniors, right? But what, is that correct?
No. I think you're talking about, they took an ACT in August, December, and March.
So just during the year, during junior year, preparing that 1 year for it, they grew that much? Oh.
Absolutely.
And some of these programs are less than a year. College readiness starts, after we have that practice test.
My daughter went 8 points.
I didn't know if you're comparing the freshmen or sophomores or what. That's what I.
Yeah.
This is something we want to make sure when we're doing staffing, we're supporting.
Okay.
Kevin, Mike, one point. When we start to focus on ACT prep, it's in the, are we sure we're not just teaching to the test so they can get a high score to matriculate to a college, but are we giving them the essentials so that they can sustain that score and succeed once they're in?
I'll let Kristen and Pam talk to the curriculum a little bit about the CAP. I'm sure there's some test-taking strategies.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm about to lose my power. So do you...
Kristen or Pam can answer that.
Yeah, so, yes, there are some specific test-taking strategies, but looking at those students and seeing what goes on in those classes, they're teaching reading skills, they're teaching math skills that they need to be successful so that they don't enter into those remedial courses. They're teaching them the foundational skills in these areas that they need to be successful. And what happens is oftentimes, sometimes CAP students won't perform that great in April, but they continue to get the support they need through these classes and through their core academic classes, and they take the ACT again in the summer, and they improve their score even more.
And our CAP sections are run in correspondence with their core classes. Because there's a cap science, a cap math, correct, Pam? Help me if I'm missing some.
Yeah.
So it's not like this, all they do is year-round is test prep. They're actually getting English, but it's geared at
Right.
their skill
You know,
set.
reading passages and so forth. I think what we've discovered is that we demystify the test, so it's not, it's a comfortable environment. It's a test that they can maneuver through. We build their confidence by exposure to it. And that also helps them when they get to college and they have higher stakes tests in front of them, or a college course that's putting a lot more weight. I think they have a little bit more confidence in their ability to produce and maintain. So I think some of it is simply in this class, they get very comfortable with the way the questions are asked. And when you look at the comments students make after they take these courses, that's what they're talking about. I learned the strategies on how to read the passage, how to make educated guesses, how to rule things out, how to
That's what I'm more
trust my
concerned about,
knowledge.
strategies to take the test. I'm more concerned about the essential, really improving reading, not just learning tricks to take the
Which
test.
is the Common Core.
Right.
You're getting at why the states are feeling that this No Child Left Behind has been somewhat faulty, but that's a whole other debate. But the Common Core is trying to get us to do the right kind of work as well. And so there will be new assessments kids will be facing. The Park assessments in 2014, where it'll be interesting to see where the nation will go. Will it go away from ACT, or will it be these Common Core national kind of curriculum type tests that are doing the deeper level analysis and thinking and skill level you're talking about? That's where the nation's kind of moving now, shifting. But right now, our kids exist in a system with certain rules, and we're trying to get them to succeed in the way the rules are set up right now. But it's evolving for the exact reason you identified.
Okay.
Kristen?
On the next slide, something to consider for the future is that the College Readiness Program is funded by the Arthur Foundation grant. And so we have limited funding left in that grant. And so that's a concern for us as we move forward. The other concern is that Lori Ritchie was funded in previous years as a 0.4. So this year it's we were really grateful to get the 0.2 back, but we had to really sit down and think about, how should we utilize that 0.2 to best serve the students. And so we decided to look at still pushing her into that science rotation so she's there for the cap, but then also utilizing her in the role that she had been in the past with working with the science department, working with the English department and the social studies department to provide them support with the reading strategies that they could use in all of their classes, so that we were not just limiting her role to the CAP students, but that we were still utilizing her in the capacity of helping all of our students prepare like we had been in the past. And the reason also that that's a concern for us is because she used to, with having that additional 0.2, she'd be able to meet with students on an individual basis, whether it was during their lunch or during their additional study hall, and provide them specific support in some of these strategies. And so that's one aspect that we were not able to do with the reduced cap.
It will be my recommendation to the board that we refund that next year when we get to staffing.
Cap.
We have data to show it's been working.
Sure.
This was one of those things where we went through the staffing, we looked at all costs, and then as we saw our test scores and then saw the impact she was making, that's why we came to you right away in August, and we brought the additional 0.2 back. And this is something going forward. We realize that it aligns directly with what we're trying to do.
And so looking at the class of 2012, and when you have their initial ACT scores, and then when they actually graduate, because oftentimes after that April test, those students will take it, either one more time or two more times, the overall composite score increased by 0.6. And we are not really able to predict what this class will be, because we haven't gotten the actual composite score from ACT yet. That is not released until October. So we can't really look to say, the class of 2013 has this composite score until we have that information, and then look to see what it maybe could be when they actually graduate.
And we don't know how that class did when they were juniors, the 2012 class?
They were 23 point.
No, I mean, I thought you were trying to make a different point. You showed with the current class of seniors that last year, some of them, one group went up 3.45 and one 6.7 during that year.
During the junior year.
So, and you don't know what they're going to do this year. But I thought you were going to make the point that this senior class only went 0.6 senior year, but you don't know what how the 3.45 and the 6.7 for that class that just graduated compared to when they were juniors. You understand my question, Pam?
Well, and it is getting confusing. So what we did is we took this year's seniors and we showed you how far they came in their junior year by taking 3 separate. Okay. So now we're trying to predict how many of them will make that 21 benchmark, what percentage point, you know, and we really can't. You have to do that off their composite, and we don't have that composite score yet. But last year's kids, from their April junior ACT to their senior ones, they took their best senior year ACT, they grew another 0.6.
Right.
So we don't know. You could deduce maybe this group would grow that much, maybe not.
I'm
we don't
asking
know.
a completely different question.
Okay.
What is you asking what the composite is?
We don't.
No.
I'm trying to figure out it seems to me, if they were these seniors with the 0.6 were enrolled in course or whatever, they didn't get very much value out of it. In senior year, they went up 0.6. Your current senior year went up 3.5 to 6.7 by enrolling class. That's a pretty good improvement. So trying to figure out what do we do with juniors versus seniors, and if we were getting a big bang for our buck for last year's junior class, and we got a very low return, relatively speaking. Sure, kids are happy to get 0.6 more in their ACT, but on a relative basis, didn't really improve them compared to what this one did. That's what I'm asking a question about.
I think I can answer your question, but that 0.6, typically those students will then take it in the summer.
Right.
Or, you know, in September, October. So we're not really, that doesn't really show what we're doing for the students in their senior year, because they're taking it over the summer or right away in the fall. And so, you know, we can't really make that.
It's a narrow window of time where they haven't had much more even opportunity for classwork.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're almost there, buddy. Keep going.
So the next thing that we're looking at is AP performance. And so the first number is the AP students with passing scores. So the percent of our AP students that earned a 3 or higher. And so you can see that we surpassed the target range, and we had 72.4% of our AP students that were able to pass one exam. And then the AP participation is the percent of students of the enrollment. So looking at the next slide, it kind of breaks down that 72.4%. So I wanted to show you that, you know, the trend at RB has been to increase that number over the years, so that students are not only taking the test, but that we have a higher percentage passing the exam. And then I put in there, I know that the numbers are small and probably hard to read, but I wanted to put this in to show that we continue to surpass not only the state of Illinois in what their percentage is, but also globally as well. And so for 2012, the percent of total AP students with scores 3 or higher was 61.5%, and at RB at 72.4%.
Is our policy for AP still open for students? We don't restrict just the top? Okay.
The next.
Could you go back to the last slide? Something didn't seem right in what you said. Can you go back 2 slides, Marianne? So AP participation percent of students, we showed that we improved significantly. But on the next slide, our participation rate has continuously gone down.
Oh, unfortunately, it goes the opposite direction.
Can
So
you
it goes
go
from
to the next one down there?
from the earlier year to the, because we built it off of an Illinois and a
Left to
global
right.
chart. So we just,
Yeah.
so it's going the reverse. It goes
And
from-
those are charts that AP gives us, so you have to look from left to right, so the column that
I'm
you're.
looking from left to right.
Number of
Total-
exams decreased, total AP students decreased, but you have to remember, we implemented an honors track, and we didn't have the honors track, it was either AP or regular.
No,
So that's why you're gonna see the number of students and exams somewhat drop a little bit compared to 08, 09, and 10.
how does the participation rate show that we had? I was looking the right way. 2012's this year, on the right, the older years are here. We said we increased significantly our participation. That looks like our participation dropped to me. Total AP students have continuously gone down.
I think what continues to increase is our percentage of AP students with 3 or better.
That was a different number. That was the
Right.
72.4%.
Right.
But
So we're at the top.
the number of people participating, we said we've increased dramatically. So how are we measuring that? Because those numbers show that both the number of exams.
There is no number on that chart that shows the number of kids who participated.
Total AP students and number of exams, that's not participation?
Go back to the
Go back to
previous.
the previous slide.
Unless you had a drop.
How did
in
we
the
measure
enrollment.
AP participation as a percent of student enrollment? It shows that we went from 37 to 35 to 33, up to 43.
Percentage of student enrollment, so
But on the next chart, it shows
So
that.
you're saying they were a higher concentration, they were taking
Taking
what,
more.
there was a smaller population of students, but they were taking a
More
lot
AP.
more AP courses?
right.
Does anybody know how we measure that number?
I think they just need to go back and
Yeah, I'd have to
verify the
figure out.
43%.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that
No,
one
that's
I
act- that's on
trust.
the-
I would say the one on the other chart might be, they might count total AP students, it might count particular kids.
I think AP participation
Multiple
counts
times.
the number of AP courses an individual takes, so they can count
Right.
more. So it's like the total number of courses taken instead of total number of students.
We can report back to
Thank
you.
you. That's fine.
We'll report back on how that's
That's a little
calculated.
confusing.
Okay, Mary.
Could be simpler.
So equity and excellence looks specifically at the number of graduating seniors that took an AP test and passed, so under 3 or higher, at any point in their high school career. So it's not just looking at that senior year. And so for the graduating class of 2012, we had more than half of those students not only take but also pass an AP test. And so that, is something to celebrate. And then also AP scholars, looking at the number of test takers and then looking at scholars, we had 64 students that earned a 3 or higher on 3 or more AP exams. And as you progress down the chart, it gets a little more difficult in the national scholars. Are students that have a 4 or higher on all of the AP exams that they take, and that they've taken at least 8 AP exams. So I think that having 7, is phenomenal, because that's a pretty difficult accomplishment for a student to take, 8 or more AP exams in their high school career and earn a 4 or higher on all of them.
But we've decreased. So we have steadily, so in the last 3 years, we've gone down 50%.
Yeah, but we have more distinctions.
Yeah, but the other numbers all went up.
All went up.
Other numbers are going
Our
up.
national scholars, we went from 12 to 7.
That's a
We also had almost 50 less kids, 60 less kids.
So what we're seeing, we're just starting to see the, the cream, the top percent, what they're doing. So as consistent with other educational data, our top students are competing very well. So if we start to look at that smaller population.
Okay. Next. Marianne, next
So
one.
on the next slide, just some things to consider. We don't know what impact that they're going to have, but we have larger class sizes in several of our AP courses to accommodate the foundational courses. So for example, in social studies, looking at AP Micro and AP Macroeconomics, the decision was made in that department to increase the class sizes in that so that they could have smaller class sizes in their Western Civ class where they can really work with the students in their freshman year and build those foundational skills in reading. And so that's just comparing the average class sizes for this year compared to last year. Again, we don't really know what the impact is going to have on those AP students, but it's just something to be aware of and to consider in the future to look at. And then the last thing is the matriculation data. So the rate for students to go to 2- or 4-year colleges, businesses, or technical schools, and you can see that the rate for this past year was 92%. And so looking specifically at that, we had 9 students that didn't provide information on what their plans were after they left RB. And so in talking to those guidance counselors, we figured out that 5 of them most likely went directly into the workforce, and that 4 students said that they were going to Triton, but they never requested a transcript. So we couldn't include those students in that rate. And again, 9 students makes a big difference when you're looking at the percentage.
Do you have any breakdown on the types of matriculation that they do? Do you see any trends of any of our graduates beginning to go into defined curricular programs like engineering rather than arts and sciences in general?
I have not seen any of that data. So.
Or is it pretty much the same?
We haven't, there's a company out there that does do postgraduate studies and tries to attract your alumni, obviously for a significant fee.
Well, a lot of people...
So I haven't committed to those services, but I do have them on, I have had contact and met with them a little bit.
That'd be good stuff to know, because a lot of people are beginning to think that spending $200,000 is a gift, unless it's money well spent in an engineering curriculum or the STEMs. That are directed towards a career.
I just,
Pam, I got one question to build off of this 92%. Do you think it's somewhat economy driven too?
Our counselors did say that was, some of the conversations were about that it's difficult to afford college, and, a lot of people were getting out of college and not getting jobs. So I do think that the high cost of college or the uncertain, times in the economy are having some impact on that. But, it's hard to know specifically. But they did hear more of that in conversations with their students than in the past.
I think the other thing is that service you're talking about, Dan. It's there, and there's but it's a matter of do we, that's where we were at financially last year with some of the directives from the board. It's try to get as much back to our current students than spending resources studying students out of school.
I understand that, but
so until we can fix some of that stuff, then we would maybe this board might, or the future board might say.
Well, I wasn't pushing any direction in our curriculum. I was more interested in Kristen's, if she had any information on where they chose to go, whether there's any shift in focus.
Well, we do track on our school profile the percentage that go to 4-year universities, the percentage that go into the military, the percentage that go into technical schools. Those numbers haven't shifted much at all from the previous year. So those that are going seem to be going to the same kinds of places they have before. Naviance would track our college program, might track what, but it's student reported, and parents sitting on the board of former graduates would maybe know what kind of information but the graduate has to put it in, where they're going and what they're going into. We'd have some, we don't know if that's actually what they do and sustain.
Yeah, I was just interested in knowing if there's any differences in the courses of studies chosen by our recent graduates versus 10 years ago.
It'd be self-reported, and we could take a look at that. I mean,
we could get some
Naviance didn't exist
out
10
there.
years ago, but, there might be something.
So don't we do an exit survey also? Just even asking the students what they're
out there. It just hasn't been collated into useful form, I guess.
Do we do an exit survey?
It's kind of done through Naviance now, where they go on and then they let us know where they want our transcripts to go and what their plans are, and they answer some of that. But yeah, there is a senior survey that's done.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Any more slides?
That's it.
Can I say something right now? Can I say something right now? Trial by fire. And just me as a board member, you did a great job.
Thank you.
You really had the numbers, you really, honestly, you did a very great job. Pam, you did a great job too, but I think for presenting it, you did a very good job presenting and knew your numbers right up there.
Kristen, we'll be inviting you back with Pam when we start to talk about the goals and the development. So as you heard, based on some of the questions you heard tonight, we want to start compiling some of that data so we could break out like that graduation rate and look at our EPAS growth and some of those things.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
We appreciate
Kristen.
it.
Thank you.